So it still says you will let me in, or?
Oh, sorry. I thought I had.
Okay.
Hi, okay, hi, everybody. Natalie will help you. Turn off your volumes. Let's go here.
Okay.
Natalie. Mute this. Okay, there we go.
How's that?
Thank you.
Okay.
So I will call this policy committee meeting to order, and we would like to recognize that this meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Lillooet Nation. I will open the floor to nominations for committee chair, please. Go ahead, Director Birch-Jones.
To nominate Director Rainbow. Tony?
Thank you. Do you accept Director Rainbow?
Yeah, I do.
Thank you. Calling a second time for nominations. And calling a third time for nominations. Director Rainbow is acclaimed as committee chair, and I'll turn the chair over to him to run the election for vice chair.
Oh, thank you. Okay, could I have a nomination, please, for vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Chris Pettingill.
Chris, do you accept that?
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
Any other nominations? And I declare Chris as vice chair of this committee. Thank you.
Woohoo! Congratulations.
Woo-hoo. Yes. Now, maybe I could start. Do we need to be formal in this meeting and with director this and director that, or can we just use first names? We need to be formal. Okay, that's fine. I have a motion to approve the agenda, please. Moved Director Ford, second Director Birch-Jones. In favour, opposed, motion carries. So we start the new business then, 3.1 CAO verbal update.
Thank you, Chair. I have a list of 24 items. I'd like to walk the committee through this. No, I'm just kidding. I'd just like to provide a general background to the committee. We've attempted to and shared late yesterday an outline for discussion that is just a proposal to the committee. This is obviously the committee's business and decision with how to go, but we put a rough outline that the committee may want to consider to make its way through the new business agenda items, and that would be, and I'm happy to facilitate that conversation if it pleases the committee, and we're happy to go any other way as well. And that's it.
I got lost with I'm still looking for you, the thing you sent out yesterday. I had it, but it's gone. Excuse me just a moment, please.
Could we also do a screen sharing and just walk through it together? I see Natalie there.
We can make that happen if the committee wants to.
Yeah, let me just oh my goodness. Natalie, I lost everything when we were fiddling around there.
Would you like it to be shared on screen?
Yes, that would be great. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Yes.
See people.
So that's just a proposed framework for discussion, chair and committee, and the discussion can obviously go wherever the committee wants to take it.
So any comments on that from anybody? How would you like to proceed? Jeez. Natalie, is there a way that I can see people and see that thing?
And I think you can probably. Did Director Rainbow need to be in there for the rest of the meeting, or just in the event that there was a vote?
He can come out and just watch it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That's a great idea.
Can I?
Now that the election's over, if you want to just.
Okay, so then I can see people there. Okay, that's good. So let me have a bit out of this thing. Oh, leave. Right. Okay.
Director Rainbow, if you want to sit here, there's also this screen here that's here for the chair.
Has that got everybody on there? Okay.
Like it's that, but it's in front of you instead of.
Okay. Good. So. Excuse me, everybody. We'll be ready in just a moment. There we are. Let's see. Yeah. It's in my email, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Okay. So can we see the next screen if we can scan? Now, when I looked at this, I didn't know what BLUF.
Oh, sorry, bottom line up front. Sorry, it's a habit.
Bottom line up front, okay. So, apologies to everybody that's online here. It took us a while to get sorted here. Now that we are sorted, and comments from the committee on how you would like to proceed. Would you just like to go through this outline that CEO Dalton has provided us?
That would be my preference if he can, please.
Okay, so would you like to address these points in turn? Expand on them or?
Yeah, what I might recommend is if because it is the first meeting, it's a broad subject and sort of getting across the start lines could be challenging. I could walk through this presentation and obviously be open at any point to going wherever the committee wants to go. I think at least this is a reasonable start state. And then again, if at some point the committee wants to proceed in a different direction or break out and discuss something, we can do that. But it might be good just for me to facilitate the discussion.
Yeah, when I looked at this, when you sent it out to us, my feeling was that it would be useful if you went through it with us and let that part of the discussion, then we'll pick it up from there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. So this is from a staff perspective, and the discussion logic was based on the notion of approaching this work, this governance excellence priority work that the board has identified as a project, because it It is a big piece of work. The scope could vary considerably. And from a staff perspective, getting the committees thinking on things like project name, scope, process, and some agreement on initial work term items and next steps would be helpful for us to be able to support you. But again, I recognize that this is a big piece of work, and I've seen governance reviews done quite differently. So this is just a start state conversation.
I'm fine, I'm happy with that. I'm not hearing anything from anybody
Okay.
else, so.
So the background is pretty straightforward. And again, it is exciting that this has been established, I think, by the board as a priority, because it is very important work. And it's work that organizations don't often find the time to do. And I know that just in the number of board meetings that have happened with this new board, there's been a number of comments and ideas related to governance to be addressed. And so this is a good place to do that, obviously. And I would say staff has a number of things that they would put into this work item as well. And the last point, of course, is around prioritization and process. How do we staff this work? There are no comments on that. This is just was just meant to get the juices flowing. It's not an all-inclusive list. It may not even be a relevant list, but this is I think for any project, it's clear to understand what problem we're trying to solve or what opportunity we're trying to pursue. And so this was meant to get some feedback from the committee and help the committee discuss an aim.
Just right off the bat, I had a question for CAO Dalton. I actually don't know what BLUF stands for.
Oh, we just had that. Bottom line up front.
Thanks. Sorry, I missed that.
I don't know what it means, but that's what it stands for.
It means that most people, after being led through a presentation, forget what it was all about. So it's just stating up front what from a staff perspective, we would hope to leave with from the committee.
Good. Any other comments? Questions? Judge Pettingill?
Yeah, thanks. Just wondering if we need to worry about or establish a budget, or we just sort of assume we've got the whatever staff and financial resources we need, or is that, is that part of our work here?
Thank you. Through the chair, that is part of the work, Director Pettingill, is to address both of those issues. Staff capacity and budget.
Hard to see those pictures.
Is there anything that's and there's a placeholder later in the conversation for that to take place? Is there anything that, from a project aim perspective, that the committee would like to see achieved by this work that's not there, or any changes? Anything else around the committee table?
Red Ford?
Thank you. I think that this captures a massive body of work, but certainly work that we've touched on as being required before we move forward in a lot of the projects that we've been talking about for the last several months as this new board has started working together. And so I think that as we unpack a lot of these things, we'll find efficiencies and simplifications of some of the processes that we've had at play for a long time. And I'm excited about this work. So thank you to the CAO for embarking on this. And I think we'll get there as we go.
Judge Pettingill?
Yeah, and I'm excited about this. It seems like a good direction. And so I'm just interested to kind of play through what's listed here and see where we end up. The one other thought that comes to mind is it started to get the sense last board meeting that this might become a parking lot for a lot of things that we're not ready or unsure of how to deal with at the board table. So just how we as a committee sort of prioritize and as new stuff sort of comes in every board meeting maybe, or just what we do about that at some point probably needs some consideration.
Let's just use the little hand icon. And when that flashed up, I could say, and I see Janice used it, Director Stone has used it as well. That's much easier for me to see on this screen than if you wave your hand. So that's great. Thank you. Director Stone.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. I think that this is really great. It captures a lot of things that I think we have previously spoken about for the direction of this work. One thing that I think we may want to consider adding is just something along the lines of having a shared understanding or common baseline of the expectations for governance. So that might fit under the reflect governance best practices, but I think a big part of this is creating a shared board understanding as well as a shared staff understanding around what the expectations are of the board. So that might just be something that we want to call out explicitly.
Thank you. That's something that might, without adding it as a separate item, it might be something that kind of just develops as we go with our discussions. Okay.
Are we good for AIM then?
I think we probably are. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other comments from there. I'm fine to move on. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So project scope here, that phrase soup to nuts was just meant to say it could be anything and everything. And I think similar to some of the comments that were recently shared, I think that the scope might evolve out of ongoing conversations by the committee and the board in identifying items, governance items. And I think that perhaps an additional project scope would emerge in the report back to the committee that staff will no doubt go away and prepare in response to this work. That was just to kick off the conversation on project scope. And soup to nuts, I learned really recently was not a common phrase either. That comes from the old days of formal dinners where it started with soup and ended with nuts, and it means everything. So that's where that comes from. Any thoughts, Chair and committee, on scope at this point in time, or is that something that will maybe fall out a little more organically through the conversation and the work?
Yeah, I think Director Pennigan made the comment a while ago, just now, about this being sort of a parking lot. We referred a number of things to this committee, and we need to take some care there, I think, and make sure that we don't allow it to just balloon to a point where we really can't do anything effectively. So yeah, soup to nuts is fine, but I think one of the things we will need to do is limit the scope of our work. Who's that hand up there? Director Birch-Jones?
Thank you. I think soup to nuts is great. And we can sort of narrow things down as we, sort of find our feet. But having that parking lot so that those issues come up, we feel like we can put them in a place that's safe, that we will get to. And I think obviously we're starting slow, but we'll pick up our pace. And so I like that soup to nuts. Thank you.
We're okay to move along? Looks like it. Sure.
So some thoughts on process, which I would suggest to continue to evolve here, but just a couple of considerations maybe for the committee or seeking committee feedback on managing this initiative as a project with a distinct work plan. And I think this is obviously, regardless of scope, it is going to be a large piece of work that To the next point, timeline phase is ongoing, and this is related to some of the comments on scope 2 is this a 6-month project, a year? Does it extend through a mandate or some parts of the work identified by the board, a specific project, and the parking lot items and other items treated as under sort of the guise of continuous improvement or just do it type activities? Just a thought about the other board members who have contributed ideas through board meetings and the like, whether the committee would like to see a survey as part of this work to engage all board members in building the initial work plan. And then just a couple of thoughts on broad options. There could be many, is for this to be internal and meaning staff facilitated, or option 2 would be to make it external and consultant facilitated. Just 2 rough ideas to start, and a few rough ideas to start the conversation around process.
Thank you. Director Ford.
Thank you. This is a tremendous amount of work, and I think given what we know about our own staff capacity, I would suggest an external consultant would be a good way to move forward. And yeah, I think staff have enough on their plate. I mean, obviously, this is up to the CAO to manage staff's capacity, so I'm not trying to do that, but I would be supportive of an external consultant who's done this work. I work with a number of these consultants through the work that I'm doing elsewhere, and there's a huge list of people that could do this quite easily and inexpensively, and allow us to keep that capacity in check. Thanks.
Yeah. Director Stoner, and then I see Dr. Birch-Jones as well.
Yeah, thank you. Agree that this work should be managed as a project with a work plan that we prioritize as this committee on what pieces we want to move forward when. I think that will keep us all on track. In terms of timeline, I think it will be ongoing for the foreseeable future, given the list of things that I know is further down in this presentation. I think either we have a survey to engage other board members, or we just report back out at a full board meeting and just provide them with an update and give them an opportunity to share any feedback. Might be a quicker way to engage the broader board. And I agree, this is a significant lift, or it may potentially be a significant lift. And so I think I am supportive of providing a little bit of external support. I think the one risk is that at some point we'll have to connect back to some of our staff. So it is a committee of the board. So already we are using staff services and resources to pull this committee together. Some of the pieces of work are very direct in terms of bylaw updates and policy work internal. So I think I'm open to staff suggestion on what the best way is to manage that, but appreciate that if we do, I think, want to see it move forward in a timely manner, then adding some form of capacity will be necessary. Whether that's external or internal capacity, I think is a question that I'd like to hear staff response on. Thank you.
Director Birch-Jones.
Thank you. And I'm not hearing, certainly didn't hear Jenna very well. And I mean, my internet is lousy here sometimes. So that's why you'll see me turning off my video. But when I hear Jen Ford saying that there's lots of consultants that can do this work and not necessarily expensively, then I immediately think that would be my first choice. And yes, sorry, we should hear back from staff on the questions that Jenna just posed. Thank you.
Yeah, my own view, looking at this committee, I could see that there are some things, some justification for it to be an ongoing committee that would review and deal with the issues that come up on as I say, an ongoing basis. But I think we also need to have at the outset some kind of timeline, some kind of a goal to say that we want to have we want to call it a report or something concrete that we take to the board rather than just occasionally sending messages back to them. I think at some point there needs to be an item on the committee of the whole agenda so that we can present work to the board and then have a full discussion with the whole board on what we're proposing before it ever gets to a point of getting to be a bylaw or something that's established in that way.
Chair,
Yeah, please.
could I respond to a couple of the comments
Yeah,
about
please do.
capacity and staff? And one, just having given this some thought in advance of this meeting, taking into account a number of changes that are going on internally, and if it's okay, I'd like to ask Kristen and Angela if they want to share anything on the staff side, because they're the two parties that are most implicated in this work staff wise for the next number of months. But knowing that there's going to be a transition of leadership in the legislative corporate services side, as well as some hiring and team building and a lot of work to continue. One way to look at this going forward or managing it is to not wait until all that's done to start this work, because it is important work, and governance work is often one of those things that falls to the wayside when organizations get busy and have other priorities. We'd have to look into this, but the notion of an external consultant doing some of the larger pieces of work around assessing the state of governance in the organization, bringing a perspective of best practices today into the committee and through to the board, doing that work concurrent with some of the structural change that's going to take place, would allow that to get done and hopefully align to a degree when that consultant work gets down to brass tacks and needing a procedure bylaw rewrite as an example, or a particular bylaw rewrite or a process change, that hopefully we'd have staff available then to take those pieces of work and do them. And the other thing I wondered about in the interim is this notion of quick fixes or just do it's, which are never as easy as they sound. But, you know, the one item I know the board discussed, and I think perhaps its first meeting, was the amount of time dedicated to or allocated to delegations when they appear before the board. And there was some conversation around that. You know, those types of items, those sort of continuous improvement pieces that don't take, you know, dedicated or considerable staff time are probably things that can move ahead concurrently as well. And so that was just a very rough way in my mind that I conceived of this perhaps coming together in response to some of the committee members' comments. But I think it would be, you know, interesting to offer to Kristen and Angela if they've got any thoughts on this at this point.
Yeah. Kristen, do you have any comments?
Nothing to add to the CAO's comments, except one thing more to earlier discussions was that anything that comes out of this committee will go to the board as a recommendation. So like the powers of like this committee has no delegated authorities.
No.
So all the work will flow back through up to the board.
Good, thank you. Angela?
Thank you, Chair. I concur with the CEO's comments around that ability to start the work as it was outlined as a board strategic priority. It would be great to start moving forward with it. The consultant, as the corporate services department starts to build and get to capacity to be able to support that work, but to be able to start doing things concurrently would be a great move. Thank you.
So you see this as, or do we see this as a process that includes, well, soup to nuts, as you express it. At the same time, we could pick out something, as the example you just gave was the amount of time we allow delegations at board meetings. That's an item that could be dealt with separately and taken to the board and decisions made while this committee is still moving on with its broader considerations.
That would be a general Yeah, a general approach.
Yeah. We ready to move along? Looks like, yeah, I don't see any other comments. Okay, next page.
So those were the discussion points around AIM process. The rest of this was really just to share back with the committee what we've heard to date in terms of items that would be included in a work plan. And if there was a desire to go with an external consultant, part of that consultant's work, any project like that would be a scoping exercise right out of the gate. So they would come in and try and get their arms around the current state of affairs and what issues the committee and board members were interested in being looked at. So this, this conversation on work items today is really just in support of us having a good list or catalog of what board members or the committee members today have identified. But it would be, the event that we went with a consultant, it would be shared with a consultant and used to develop a work plan at some point. So the committee may or may not want to review that list or brainstorm today. That's totally up to the committee.
If we decide to go ahead with a consultant, have we got a place in the budget for that right now?
No, no, and I would recommend if that's the way the committee wanted to go, that we'd probably be looking at a $25,000 contract to do this work, roughly speaking.
Okay, can we just spend a couple of minutes on this? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I just have one comment just before we move on about the delegations. There's certain items that might be better to batch a little bit, like that delegation is that 5 minutes is embedded in our procedure bylaw and will require a procedure bylaw amendment. And as part of that, all kinds of advertising. So we might want to be not just, that would, the cost involved with just fixing that one little piece might not be the approach the committee wants to take. They might want to wait and see what we can batch. There are certain things like the electronics policy that the board looked at maybe a year ago and we didn't progress that at the time, is something that we could do that's outside the procedure bylaw and would also be, I think, would be a big, it would be a great piece of work a big win that could be advanced sooner rather than later. Thanks.
So part of our work is going to be at the beginning to sort out what things we can deal with quickly and what things are more complex. Okay. See you.
Yeah, and if I can add to those comments, one of the, if the committee decided and the board supported going with an external consultant to manage the review, one of the things that we could do in the interim was just mentioned by the corporate officer is take that list of items that have been identified by the board and sort of do that triage, go through and look at what can and what can't proceed, either based on staff capacity, money, or complexity, like if the procedure bylaw had to be open. So that's a piece of work we could do and bring back to the committee. I also can't resist, because it's an interesting governance piece, in flagging where the governance conversation may go. One of the things to consider is what gets placed in bylaws, what gets placed in policies, and what gets placed in procedures. And, I think that example of some of it's legislated, you don't have a choice, you're required to have it in a procedure bylaw. But there's a good example of a relatively simple decision that a board may or may not be able to take because they have to amend a procedure bylaw. So I think that is a good example of the importance of this work every once in a while to reflect on the state of governance and see if it still makes sense.
Okay. Director Pettingill.
Yeah, just looking at the list, I assume we are sort of thinking in context of the list. The point that Director Stoner made about just sort of, if I'm not misrepresenting this, but general governance and the role of directors. And I think we've struggled a bit in terms of, like there's some items around the EAD committee and Kivas, which gets to at it a little bit, but just sort of at a high level, you know, is there a different role? Because it seems like there are some different roles and responsibilities maybe for area directors than municipal directors, or and I guess just wrapping my own head around that, it's a bit unclear. And I sort of thought that was one of the just doing a bit of work around that and making sure that's clear for everyone was a piece of what we might tackle, and that might precede some of the other more specific policy work, like for, you know, code of conduct policy review, for example.
Thank you. I'd like to, excuse me, just a minute, Director Stone. I'd like to suggest that we spend a bit of time right now discussing this idea of whether we want to hire a consultant or not, because if we decide that we do, and if there is a $25,000 ticket attached to it, then we need to do it very quickly to get the budget tweaked in the next week. So that's something that we might want to come to a decision on today, so that we can take it to the board in March and get, if we want to have some money allocated, then it gives us a chance to do it. Director Stoner.
On that particular note, I think that we should make a request to the board. If it's not going to be too late, I would look to staff for our procedure here, but if we can make a recommendation from this committee via motion to the board to consider an addition of up to $30,000 of a contract line item for the governance excellence work, then I'd be supportive of that. Hopefully it's timely enough to incorporate in the budget amendment or the budget before March.
Thank you. Director Burst-Jones.
I'd second that motion.
Oh, was that a Director Stoner? Was that a motion, or were you just discussing?
It was more of a comment that turned into a motion, so I'm happy to keep it as a motion if that's where we're going.
Yeah. Comments from anybody else? I think Director Stoner, was that up to 30 that you said?
35.
I did say up to 30. I feel like we should give ourselves a bit of wiggle room.
Thank you.
Agree.
So we have a motion. It's moved and seconded. Any comments or questions or discussion? Well, seeing none or hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so we can put that on the agenda for the next board meeting then. That goes as a recommendation to the board for the next meeting. Yeah. Okay. What do we need to do now?
Chair, if I could, there may or may not, oh, sorry.
Director Stoner, then Director Burst-Jones.
Yeah, I was just gonna make a comment before we move back to the budget on this list of potential governance work plan items. And I think building on Director Pettingill's comments, one that was not yet highlighted that I'd like to add is onboarding and handbook for the board. So it's not super imminent because we do have a new board and we've done it, but I think giving some thought to what those materials look like and that what onboarding looks like might give us an opportunity to start to address some of those questions that Councillor Pettingill was, or sorry, Director Pettingill was looking at.
Okay. I find it very difficult to hear. Yeah, I think it probably would. I find it difficult to hear though, the sound.
You can turn the talking
Can we?
to Director Stein is quiet, so I'm turning her up and then the others are down.
Oh, okay.
Trying to adjust.
Okay.
Would you like to stop screen sharing?
Yeah, let's just. Yeah, Director Burst-Jones. Oh, look at that.
Thank you, Chair. And I know we do have a bit of an orientation manual for new directors, because I certainly remember going through it with Linda Flynn. So we don't have to start from zero there. My thought was I'd like it if while the five of us are together with staff, we could decide on a bit of a meeting schedule that is something like, you know, the first Thursday of every month in the afternoon or every other month or something like that. So we can just pencil it in so we don't have to go through the doodle poll every month, which takes, I mean, okay, I'll say no more. I just would like to float that suggestion. Maybe before we close today, we'll try and set some kind of tentative schedule up.
I wonder, is it worth considering the possibility of having this committee meeting follow the EAD meeting on a Wednesday? No.
Not for the travelers.
Not for the travelers. Okay, thank you. See you.
Thank you, Chair. I just, in terms of thinking about a workflow based on the conversation to date, it might be worth thinking about starting quarterly. I don't believe we're going to have anything to report on in a month. The committee may certainly have things to discuss, but until a project charter is formed, which I think we could do a quarter from now, that might lead to a different cadence for the meetings. But I think my recommendation at the moment would be to start quarterly and then adjust based as the workflow or as the committee feels they need to get together.
Thank you. Comments? So that will put our next meeting then at April, May, June. So this is it. And we do it on a calendar there, Thursday. So what we're thinking here is we'll set the next meeting, and then based on where is that there? So the next meeting would be June. So Thursday, this one, 15th.
15th, that's BLGMA and.
Oh, that's not good then. So it'd be the 22nd.
We need a little bit of time to get those minutes turned around and onto the board agenda. So that's pretty tight.
That's tight, okay.
Assuming we have recommendations for.
Earlier in June then to the 8th. We're just checking the calendar here with the various meetings and things that are happening. The 8th, do you think? Okay, so 3 months from now would be the 15th, but that's NMLGA, so that doesn't work. And to go to the 22nd doesn't give enough time for the staff between then and the board meeting. So we're proposing for the next meeting to be Thursday, June the 8th. At 10:30 is better for me, but yeah. Director Butch Jones said that. That's very good.
Is that 10:30 or 10?
10:30. Okay. Any objections to 10:30? No. So we have a motion to set that next meeting at the 8th of June at 10:30. Moved by.
I'll move that. Vivian here.
Jones, seconded by Director Stoner. Call the question. Any opposed? Well, motion carries. Good, thank you. Yeah, it's much better sitting over here and do these kinds of things. Okay, where do we need to go from here? So if we're going to have a consultant, do we have a motion for that yet? We can't do that until
We have
the
a
board
recommendation
meeting.
to the board, that we allocate that funding for consultants.
Yeah. So maybe between now and the board meeting, we should somebody should pay some attention to who that consultant might be, and so we have some more accurate numbers. We're going to the board and saying we'd like up to 30,000. So it might be useful to know at that time if indeed there are people available to do this work at that kind of price. So is that something we could ask you to bring back to us?
Not by the board meeting, no, Chair.
Not the board meeting.
No, but if the board were to approve that next week, then we would work to get an RFQ out soonest, but I think that's reasonable. I think that's in the ballpark of where it would be, but
Okay, so we're looking at maybe having some feedback by next meeting.
yeah, so if the board directs that, then we would go and go to market for that consultant, and then that and a couple of other work items out of this would come back to the committee in June would be the intent.
Okay. What do we do? What do we need to do more today? Excuse me. Sorry.
I'm just looking at some notes here, but I think I think what's been captured by motion is or resolution is good. I think the other thing would be just direction to staff to report back to the committee with I would call it a draft work plan for the next committee meeting. And that draft work plan could take a number of forms depending on whether or not we move forward with an external consultant, and depending on how that that search would go. But I think that would give us the direction we need to come back to the board with a meaningful report in June on next steps. And perhaps in the interim, as that kind of firms up, I could bounce that off you as chair.
Okay.
But I think a report to the board with a project, with a project plan or outline project plan would be reasonable direction.
Thank you. I see Director Stoner and then Director Birch-Jones.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair to the CEO, I think that makes sense as a next step. I'm just curious if it would be helpful to have more of a discussion at this current committee meeting on what we see as some of the priorities in that now growing list to inform that work plan development, or if that's something that you would just like to ground truth with staff and see what the immediate opportunities are. Is there a preference there?
I think that would be helpful if the committee was to have a conversation about priorities at this point, and maybe additional things that a couple have been mentioned that aren't there. I think that would all help us develop a better outline plan.
Director Birch-Jones.
Thanks. Jenna covered it. It was just what I was going to suggest. I think we should look at that list. We should add the orientation or onboarding new directors and just see if there's other things we'd like to put on there for that straw dog work plan while we're together today. And we have a few minutes anyway.
Good. So that's sorry.
That's great. Do you want me to share the?
Yes, please.
Great. Absolutely.
What are we sharing? The list. This list. Yeah, good. How much time have we got for this meeting?
2 hours, so it was 10 till noon.
Until noon.
I didn't get that. Did you try again?
I don't know what that is. That's my watch talking. I don't know what that is. Never heard that.
Okay, well, she didn't get it anyway.
No.
Okay, Director Stoner, your hands up there, I see.
Yeah, in addition to my previous edition of board onboarding, I think I also meant to include board training. So that might be something that's a little bit more tangible and direct to this current board as well, but a better understanding of what training we might want board members to go through, I think would be helpful.
Thank you. Well, everybody's really quiet today. I thought you were going to be bustling with ideas and there was fighting for time. And I think they're happy for us to just go ahead and do it.
And if I like, Chair, I would say this could be dynamic too. So if anything strikes any committee members at any time that they forgot about or they want to add to this list, we certainly add to this list as those ideas pop up.
Right, to start it.
Yeah, I think if I were to prioritize some of these, the procedure bylaw and the delegation policy jump to the top of the list for me. And the filter that I'm trying to use are things that will create streamlining of our processes and hopefully free up staff time and capacity as well as board agenda time. So that's kind of the lens. And I think those two pieces of policy or bylaw fall pretty high at the top there. Yeah, that's just my immediate feedback.
Right to forward.
Thank you. The code of conduct consideration has to be done within 6 months of the election. So I suspect that rises to the top because it will need to be done by April, unless I have that wrong, Kristen or Angela. Or
Yeah, Chris.
Thanks, Director Ford. That has been done for the purposes of that section. The board has reviewed it and endorsed the existing code of conduct. And then if the board wants to go into, or sorry, if this committee wants to have that as one of the issues that they look at in more detail, but that can happen, but we're not constrained by that timeline because we got that review.
because we did it.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
Good, thank you. Right, Birch-Jones.
Thank you. Do we have, and maybe we already have a lot of rules around this, but about just meeting procedures, like we've got electronic meetings, policy review, but what about just our regular meetings? And we've got policy around that we could review?
What do you mean, the timing of meetings or the length of meetings, or what exactly?
The conduct, like, how the meetings are conducted and, following Robert's rules or whatever. And I'm sure that's probably mostly legislated, but just as a review.
Procedure.
And to anyone else, don't put it on a list.
So we really need to look at the whole procedure plan. Yeah, that would fit into a review of our procedure.
Sorry, of course it would.
Which is something we definitely need to do. So. I think being on camera makes people shy. Usually tongue-tied like this because Dr. Penninger.
Yeah, just coming back to the idea, and I understand the sort of board handbook idea would lead to a discussion of sort of being clear about roles and responsibilities and where certain decisions happen. But there's a lot of extra stuff that might go into a handbook, and I think some of those decisions about, again, what discussions belong where. And by, who's making which decisions, those sorts of things, to my mind, would inform how we update our procedure bylaw, delegation policy, some of the EAD committee PVIS stuff. So it kind of seems to me that sort of, for lack of a better term, higher level discussion is maybe the first one to have in my mind.
Thank you.
If I could, through the chair, and I think that those types of questions would be some of the first things that a consultant or a broader scoping governance exercise would look at. Because I think those are some of the areas that are not well codified in the current mandates for committees in terms of what decisions are made where and why. And so some of it is individual director roles and responsibilities, but to Director Pettingill's point, there's a number of questions, or I think there's an opportunity to look at the mandate of all committees to try and be clearer and codify what decisions get made where. Because I'm not sure that there's one place to turn for that at the moment.
I think we have a pretty good starting point. Because previously, and just looking at Director Rainbow, Director Ford may recall this. The CAO used to do a regional district 101 presentation and go out to the municipal councils. So I think in those materials, we have a really good starting point that kind of hasn't been updated, but it's just a good baseline.
Yeah, and that's good. And then I think some of the questions that have come up from individual committees and also from board members around, does this decision need to be a board decision or could it be delegated to a committee? I think the next step are those types of decisions and being clear about where those decisions might lie and why. I think there is a really good opportunity there from the perspective of streamlining board and committee decision-making. There's a real opportunity area there.
So I've always wondered about the EAD committee, and we have the authority to spend the select funds. That's a delegated authority. Where does that, is that in our procedures, or was that just a separate resolution at some time? Or?
It's a bylaw.
It is a bylaw. Okay. So if we want to change the delegated authority to that committee or to any other committee, it requires a new bylaw.
A bylaw covering
change.
the subject matter that you would like, that the board would like to delegate.
Exactly.
To the
Okay.
committee, yeah.
Okay. So that's something that we could discuss at this committee and take as a recommendation to the board, if we wish to. Yeah.
You certainly could, and I would suggest that that's part of that overall. Like I think one of the key areas to look at is exactly that. Roles and mandates, board and committee decision-making authorities, why they exist where they do today, if they're codified or not. Does that make sense? What do governance best practices suggest? Like that's to me, that's one of the biggest and most useful pieces of work in this opportunity in terms of streamlining board and committee work and streamlining staff work, is digging into all of those things. And ideally bringing them together in one place where it's clear to all what decisions are made where and why. That's a big piece of work.
But it's something that would have an immediate impact on the way that we work as a board and as committees.
Absolutely, and it wouldn't stop this committee from making those decisions. I would suggest that there might be the context of understanding governance more broadly and why those, first of all, where decisions are made today, because it would take me a month of Sundays to try and create a cheat sheet for myself based on how those are codified. But what decisions are made where today and why? I mean, even looking at committee mandates, which are, I would suggest, pretty broad. So there's two ways. There's quick fixes and change things that are, and I think there's been a few, certainly in the PIVA side lately, that make one wonder why things are being done the way they are. But I think there's also value in that scan or that scope of governance more broadly.
Director Stoddard?
Thank you. Just seeking clarification on where the delegated authority comes from for the EAD committee. Director Clark, you mentioned that comes from a bylaw. Why would that not be in our delegation policy?
My understanding of when we're referring to delegations, it's the delegation, having people come and present, which is part of the procedure bylaw, and then just the bigger issue of powers being delegated from the board is outside of what.
They're two separate things, aren't they?
Okay, that's helpful. So clarify my previous comment on the delegation policy review priority is more so how we can delegate more authority to staff and or committees, just to clarify. So I think going back to CAO Dalton's point of like figuring out like where decisions are being made and who has the power to make what decisions at what authority is a high priority for me.
Right. And I might be a good time just to add, the EAD committee doesn't have formal terms of reference. And that's an item that's been on the work plan for years and years. We have the bylaws, there's several, at least two of them, that delegate certain authorities to EAD. But, you know, that terms of reference has been something that, and PIVAS, I believe, has some terms of reference. This committee has no terms of reference. And NETIC, not sure.
They do, but very, it's soup to nuts. That's how I would describe their terms of reference.
Right, to Bush Jones.
Thank you. I was just sort of looking, are those terms of reference in the procedure bylaw that we would be reviewing at the top?
No.
Okay. Okay, then maybe that's something to add to this list.
Maybe that's one of the first things we should do is get some terms of reference for this committee for a start before we go too far.
Terms of reference for all of our committees. Oh my, okay.
Sorry.
Just recognizing that this committee it's not just this governance excellence initiative. If the board had chosen to set up a governance excellence initiative committee, it would have been, but this committee is a lot of other things, including this large project that's been referred to it. But there's also just the general referral process that could happen at any time for any policies that come to the board. And interestingly,
That's interesting.
there is no express authority to bring policy work to this committee first. And recognizing this committee hasn't met for years, but if we had terms of reference, or if the board had terms of reference, it said everything automatically goes, but right now it's kind of a bit of a discussion with the chair. Maybe it comes to the board and maybe it gets referred to the policy committee. So those are all things we could look at. The board could look at as well.
Is that something we could decide today, that we want to direct staff to work on that and bring that back to us soon?
My response would be no.
Okay.
That we have, I would go back to this, like all these comments feeding up to a scope or scan of our current state. So from a governance perspective, what's our current state? And I think if we have the time and if we go with the consultant route as an example, that would be one of the first things that individual will do, was assess the current state of governance today. And that would touch on and bring in a number of other things that we don't even see from a best practice perspective. And I think before we start tackling individual pieces of work, I would caution doing that until we get a good sense of that scope, and then the committee would be able to prioritize. I would be concerned about us doing individual things now, which would come at the expense of something else, and whether or not that makes sense given that scan. It's kind of like, I think, going to the doctor's office and, you know, deciding on a treatment before you get the word from the doctor. I think we need to build on this work, but get somebody to come in and do that overall assessment of where we sit. Would be my 3 cents. But we are happy to go obviously wherever the committee tells us to go. Yeah. And that sounds like interesting work.
So where we stand at the moment then is we're going to the board in March to ask for this approval for the money, up to $30,000 to hire a consultant. If that is allocate, or if that's approved, then we would search for a consultant and maybe even have somebody in place for the June meeting. What else, what other things have we passed today?
This, the meeting, which isn't a recommendation to the board, it's just committee business.
Yeah, so the other thing, we have decided that our next meeting will be on June the 8th at 10:30. And I presume it will be a hybrid meeting. So you can either Zoom in or attend. Is there anything else we can really do today?
Perhaps the committee would like to consider length of these meetings.
Yeah.
Like an expectation on.
Yep. Clearly, this meeting, we might not even need 2 hours to do what we think is important today. Once we start work in earnest, how long do we need to allocate for a meeting? We have a consultant working with us. Do we want to restrict it to 2 hours, or do we want to say that we'll go from 10:30 to 4 or something like that, or 6, or whatever you like?
I think let the content drive the agenda for timing.
Okay, but we maybe need to, how to do that then? Maybe need to be prepared to be longer than 2 hours then. Rather than say it is a 2-hour meeting. Maybe we start at 10:30 and in terms of our calendar, be prepared for it to go for as long as we need it to go. Do we not need to put an end time on that? No, you okay.
Yeah, I agree. We don't have to, but it helps to understand. If it's just a 10:30 a.m. meeting until it goes till it goes.
Yeah.
You know, we do have EADs kind of like that. NEDIC used to have start and end times. So it's a.
So it's a 10:30 meeting and we'll provide lunch. And we'll leave when we're comfortable that we've done all we can achieve that day. That sound good? I'm not seeing any objections, so that's how we'll certainly approach the next meeting that way. And then once we have a consultant in place, we'll take some advice from him or her, and or them, whatever the correct term is. Any other comments for today? Director Pettingill.
Yeah, I just, and maybe I'm not fully grasping this discussion, but in my mind, when there's a consultant, when they come on, the first meeting or two might be a bit of a like, let's actually go back to starting principles, and here's what governance is and what that looks like. And I can imagine that being a longer session, but I would sort of assume once we're through that kind of thing, it'd be easier to say we're going to do 1 hour or 3 hours or 2 hours each time. And so it'd be, you know, the first initial 1 or 2 might be a little bit longer or weird, but I would sort of expect a regular, more fixed timeline after that.
Yeah, fair comment. I think just be prepared for that June meeting for it to be a longer meeting, and so that you're not booking yourself in for things at noon or 1 o'clock and then having to make changes or leave us. Anything else do you think we can do today that would be productive and help us move this along? Director Stoner.
I think I heard the CAO earlier that he'd like a motion for staff to be able to bring back a work plan for this committee to the June 8th meeting. So I will table that motion if that would be helpful.
Could you just say it again, please, Director Stoner?
Yeah, that staff bring back a proposed work plan for the governance excellence work to the committee on June 8th.
Thank you. Can I have a second? Seconded by Director Birch-Jones and Director Ford. Any comments or questions? For question, opposed, seeing none, motion carries. Okay, thank you. Any last comments?
Thank you.
Kristen, anything you'd like to add? Angela? Nothing? Okay, we're all done here. Any final comments from anybody on screen here? No?
Thank you for putting this work together, and thank you everyone for being part of this committee. It is really exciting to be working on this together.
Thank you, Director Ford. Well, I should say thank you, Chair Ford, shouldn't I? Director Pettigrew.
Oh, that's just clapping. So-
Oh, sorry, you're clapping. Oh. Well, I don't have an electronic one, so I'll do it like that. And Director Birch-Jones is clapping. Everybody seems we're all happy. Very good. Okay, well, thank you very much for
Motion to terminate.
I'm sorry, Jenna.
Motion to terminate.
Motion to terminate what? Not me, I hope. Okay. Seconded by, yes. Any opposed? We are terminated.